Welcome to the Homeschool Show. I'm Amanda Wares, your host, and my co-host today is Melanie Willis. Hey, Melanie.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing well. So we have another really great interview today. Tell us about it.
So Matthew had the opportunity to sit down with Brian Ray of the National Home Educational Research Institute. And I always love hearing everything he has to say. He is so well spoken.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating. And I will just add that when my husband was very anti-homeschooling, that having this organization that has actual research on homeschooling and, on kids that are homeschooled, it really did help change his mind. So it's important. This is going to be a great interview.
Yes, I always, anytime somebody wants to kind of argue against or is having problems within their own family, I always go straight out there and I get the research back in my head again. And then that's what I used to say. You need to remember this. So
yeah.
Let's hear what he has to say.
This is my annual conversation with Brian Ray. We go to the Alliance Leadership Conference. We go to the HSLDA Leadership Conference, and we usually take a few minutes to kind of catch up and find out what's the latest research, what kind of information is coming out, and then we always switch to some philosophical questions.
We do.
So, what's the latest studies and things you've been working on?
National Home Education Research Institute has been working on for about 2 years now with homeschool leaders and others to pull together a brand new nationwide study. And the main focus is how are home educated children doing in terms of academic achievement, and what are the reasons for why parents these days homeschool their children. And we threw in another chunk of this, which is pretty cool. And I've got a colleague, Dr. Carlos Valiente, and he has a specialty in the area of what I think generally he calls children's or human self-regulation. So the idea, can you do what you're asked to do? Can you get your focus on something when you were distracted, and those kinds of things. So we've got a nationwide study going on with that. We've got good turnout. We got good participation. So we're working on the analysis, and I would call it preliminary findings of that right now, Matt. So that's what we're doing. If you want to hear about it, we'll do it.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
So we've got families from all over the United States. They were invited, and anybody can participate. We encouraged families, if you homeschool and you gave an academic achievement test to at least one child, boom, you're in the study. And we also pointed out to people, I've reminded people this forever, and I want to tell the audience, academic achievement is not the main point in life. On a test score, it's not. But we can talk about that later. However, it is some indication, it is an indication of how children are doing, and the world around us, in a sense, values test scores.
Yep.
And it goes way back in the history of homeschooling and research on homeschooling to, way back when, late 80s, people were wondering, how can a parent who does not have a teaching certificate from the state or doesn't have 4 years of training by professors of education, how can they possibly teach a child that the letter A has 3 sounds? A, aw. So don't you have to go to college for 4 years and get a teaching certificate? That's the best way I can describe it. But we've been boiled forever in the idea that only professionals can do things. So I'm kind of giving you the roots of the whole concept. Why would we even bother studying academic achievement? And that kind of touches upon it. So we have collected the data. We get the online survey. Thank you everybody who participated. And now some scholars, some researchers, and I together as collaborators are working on this. So I'm really thankful. Behind the scenes, I'm not sure I'll say all the names, but we got a guy from at a university in Oklahoma. We got another guy who works with NARI, and we're working on it. So that's really good. The Lord is providing more people to work together at NARI, the Research Institute. So preliminary analysis so far shows that on average for this sample, they're scoring higher than the public average, on reading and writing, language, mathematics, science, social studies. We used to say history, but now there's other terms. They're in the 70th percentiles. Okay, and if people don't know, on a standardized test, 50th percentile is average. So this sample of homeschool students on average is scoring well above average. Okay, that's not new. We've found that in many studies before. And if you want to, we can get into what are the limitations of that. We're not saying necessarily that homeschooling always causes all these high scores, because there are going to be children who score below average and children who score above average. And that's another important point for homeschool families listening. Not all homeschool children are above average on test scores. Just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And if your child is below average, it does not necessarily mean something's wrong. Parents got to hear that. So we have all these scores, and then we say, well, what is correlated with, or what might be associated with these things? So we also collected all kinds of data on what we call demographics. So we got household income, mom's formal education level, dad's formal education level, ethnicity, household income, why do you homeschool, all these reasons. And we have these children's self-regulation questions about that mom and dad answer questions about. We have how many years was the child homeschooled, period. We also have the full K through 12 schooling history of the child. So let's say the child's only 6th grade, but we also know how many years of the 6 plus kindergarten. We know percent of their. We have a lot of information, which is exciting for a researcher.
Yeah.
And we look at all those, and then we do some relatively fancy statistical analyses, and voila. What are we finding so far? So far, we're finding that very, very little of all of those factors explain or are correlated with achievement scores.
Okay.
Whoa, what does that mean? So I'll tell you what we do think is related.
Okay.
And then we'll talk about that. So of all these things so far, it looks like the strongest relationship is the child's self-regulation. Like, can he do what he's asked to do? Can he be doing something and be asked to stop and work on this? Things like that. They're about, I think there were 10 or 12 questions about this, where the parent answered questions about the child. That was, as of now, okay, preliminary. We're not published yet. This is preliminary. That's the big explainer. Is that a word? Explainer? Explanatory factor. Yeah. And so what's not explaining it? Not household income.
Okay.
In most people know this. In research on public schooling, if a child is from a high income home versus a low income home, he is much more likely to score high in achievement. Okay, everybody knows it. It's just kind of what you find. If a child has high formal education mom or dad versus low formal education mom or dad, she's much more likely to score high on standardized tests. If a child is from Asian background versus white Anglo background versus black background versus Hispanic, Asians are, almost everybody knows, it's kind of like almost a joke that they do better academically. And then you go into the other ethnicities. Let's see, what else do we kind of know generally from research? Generally speaking, if you're from a family with 2 parents versus single parent, generally speaking, 2 parents, child's going to do better in public school. But again, in this study so far, like in other studies I've done, which at least 3 other nationwide studies I've done, very similar, those things don't seem to matter in homeschooling. It's kind of like, what is it? And I've written articles on this 20 years ago more. I call it, I love this word, maybe homeschooling is an ameliorator of the effects or relationships of all these other things. Yeah. Why? We could talk about that, but that's where we are so far in this study. The Lord willing, it'll be in some journal within a year.
Right.
And we'll get it out there to everybody. And maybe, before that, If people want to sign up with NHERI, NHERI.org, and click Get Connected, you'll be the first to hear about this study. Yeah. So that's where we are so far.
I think just as a closing comment on that, it's encouraging to parents to know that this reduces the effect of those different influences and gives the kid the chance to be the determining factor. The self-regulation. You can work as well as you want on this and succeed in it. That's a great conclusion to see. You know?
It's a reminder. I think it's also a reminder to parents that we're just theorizing, right? We're just theorizing. I think it's a good reminder to parents that this is my philosophy showing up here. Okay, do I want my children to learn how to read? Absolutely. Do I want them to learn how to do decent writing? Can they write a one-page essay? It makes some sense. Absolutely. Do I want them to know mathematics, at least to be able to be a decent home economist or businessman or businesswoman? Absolutely. Do we want some of them to follow their desires to be, a scientist or a top-end carpenter? Absolutely. We want that. At the same time, philosophically, theologically, we do want them to have traits and ways of thinking that are biblical, that are godly. And there are scriptures about self-control, moderation, being, quick to hear and slow to speak. All of those in a way tie in with what scholars might call self-regulation. So I think the encouragement to parents is that remember, when you're home educating, you are discipling, training nature, the nature of the person, and the thought processes and behaviors. And maybe it's related to how well you learn. And your achievement. Maybe it's related.
That's right.
Maybe it's even causally related. I think it's maybe there's a good message in this study.
Absolutely. Okay, let's also touch on a hot topic, which not just this year, but continues this year among homeschool leaders. And I know homeschool parents are thinking about it too. And that is, how do we relate to the government? And we've talked about it before, but I think we need to continue to clarify the thoughts of jurisdiction, the thoughts of, responsibilities. Some of that has to do with taxes, and some of that has to do with how government is trying to regulate homeschooling. But let's talk for a minute on the biblical principles, the things that would guide a Christian homeschool parent in thinking about that.
Right. Yeah. You and I have talked many times, Matt, about how do we make decisions about anything? How do we make decisions about the education of our children? How do we make decisions about, for whom should I vote in November, Or how do we make decisions about, this law is being proposed in my state. Should I be involved? That's a question. Secondly, if I'm going to be involved, what should I be saying to my legislator? All of these things relate to our most fundamental beliefs, our values, our presuppositions. And for a Christian, the question isn't, should you try to think biblically? The question is, will you? So if you're a Christian, you must be a scripturalist. You don't have you have a choice, as in you don't do it or you do it, but you should do that. So when people like homeschool leaders or a homeschool family says, well, what about tax-funded things I could get for the education of my children? I would say, okay, what does the scripture have to say about that? Or if somebody, a homeschool leader here at this conference, or your everyday homeschool family that's not at this conference says, well, yeah, what about that idea that we should try to control all homeschoolers more so that maybe one evil parent does not do a harmful thing to a child? You've got to think scripturally. So my understanding, and I'm not alone, hundreds of years of theologians, brothers and sisters who are now in heaven and still here on earth, would say, well, there's something that we call areas of authority, areas of responsibility, areas of duty in the Word of God. And one is the individual, One is the family, one is the church, local and universal, and one is the civil government. These are all governments: individual government, family government, church government, civil government. And I think the simplest way I can put it is that the way I understand it, and many have understood before, is that each one of those has a sphere, a sphere, and the other one's not supposed to go in there and impinge, and those spheres are given by God. It's not, oh, maybe, the church, the local church is supposed to preach the gospel, disciple believers who get saved, born again, whatever you want to call it. It's to do things like administer the Lord's Supper and baptize people, and it's to shepherd people and all those kinds of things. We don't ask the governor of Oregon. She should not be taking tax dollars to administer the Lord's Supper once a month. We don't do that. Why do we not do that? Does it say specifically in the Bible, don't do that? No, but it does say by all the scriptures and the principles. The civil government, now we'll get to that, its job is to punish the evildoer. We see that in the New Testament, we see it in the Old Testament, and commend the doer of good. So you punish somebody who does something evil, harms somebody else, and you say, good job, keep doing a good job at all the good things you do to the individual. So now that brings us to, all right, so what do we do when somebody promotes something like tax-funded education savings accounts or tax-funded vouchers, and now we're going to give it to homeschoolers and people in private schools, like private Mormon schools, private Catholic schools, private pagan schools, private Montessori schools. What do we do? Like, yeah, money. I like money. But by the way, remember the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not covet your neighbor's ox or wife or money. So, like, oh no. There are all these things, and then we could talk a long time about this. So, because I want to get back to another picture here at this conference. But I give my money already in taxes. I'm just getting it back. No, you're not. You pay a little bit in your property tax that goes to public schools. It would never be the amount the government would spend on your children for public education. I just want to make that point because a lot of people are mixed up about that. Whether you have 2 children or 8 children, you're never going to pay enough in property taxes to go to public schools that would cover your child's 12 years of public schooling times $18,000. You're not getting it back. If you now put your kids in the system, you're going to take more of Matt's money through taxation, and more of the wealthy man's money, and more of the poor man's money. So, well, my main point here is you have to think scripturally. Another thing that just came off the pages at me this morning because some homeschool leaders were talking about the history of freedom to home educate our children in America in all 50 states. And everybody here and almost everybody listening say, yes, we thank God for the biblical freedom we have. Lesser or greater degrees in the 50 states. And we all agree with that. We believe that's a basically command from God, that the parents have the authority to decide how to raise their children, and the civil government has no authority to decide that. Now, that has nothing to do with the parents harm the child. That's another issue. We already covered that. So I'm listening to these homeschool leaders, mostly attorneys, this morning, and everybody's on page with that, on target with that. Yeah. And we need to protect that. We need to defend that.
We don't want the government
at all
regulating or telling us how to homeschool.
Absolutely. And we have, many of us, I've got a gray beard, we have believed in that biblically. We have promoted that biblically. We have fought for that biblically hard for 40 years. And everybody's on that same page. And then all of a sudden, over here we hear mumblings and rumblings from a very minority of homeschool leaders and some homeschool families today in this generation say, oh, we love tax-funded education savings accounts. We love tax-funded vouchers. And yeah, that will go through the civil government's hand. And yeah, maybe we'll be more regulated a tiny bit, or maybe we'll be more regulated a lot. And they're wanting that, fighting for that. And Matt, it just hit my head. This huge contradiction in that, this schism in the thinking, the self-contradiction in that, the cognitive dissonance. And I thought, please, brothers and sisters, wake up, wake up. This is, we have biblically believed in and fought for 40 years. I remember today and years ago, some of us homeschool leaders, like here, would go to a summit, legislative summit on Capitol Hill, U.S. Capitol Hill, Washington, D.C., and we'd go in and we would meet our U.S. senators, our U.S. representatives, and I was like, "Whoa, this is heady, man. This is cool." And we would sit down with the U.S. senator, U.S. congressman, or sometimes an aide, and we might get 7.5 minutes, and we would say, "Here's a little packet about homeschooling. Oh, and by the way, it has a research report in it by National Home Education Research Institute, Dr. Ray, and all that." And the senator or the congressman would say, "Oh, thank you for being here. This is really good. Wow, I didn't know that about home education and these parents. That's pretty great what they're doing." And he, usually a he back then, or she would say, "Now what would you like from us?" And we would say, "Nothing.
Yeah, please
Just to be left alone." And their jaws would go, "You don't want anything from us?" "No. No money, no control, no regulation." And Matt, that was very powerful, very, very powerful, extremely powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So now if and when I hear a homeschool mom or dad say, "Oh, we just want some money from the civil government, from our neighbors, we want the civil government to take it," I get sad. I get really sad.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just want to remind people, scriptural thinking, number one. Number two, you don't want any government control, and you don't want the civil government to take Matt's money or Billy Bob's money or the rich man's money to educate your children, because it's your job, it's your duty. And number one, that's scriptural, I believe. Number two, there will be government controls that come with it. So that's kind of what I'm thinking.
And another interesting issue of consistency is that many people who are homeschooling or who would maybe call themselves conservatives would insist that there is accountability for how the government spends money.
Yes. Yes.
They would insist.
Yeah. There must be.
That, and yet they want money with no no determinative factors from the government.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
we would never allow the government.
Never.
We wouldn't want to. Of course, it's the case that they would be spending money,
Yeah.
and nobody answers for how it's being spent or whoever.
Let's be real simple. What if the Navy? They're here as a sponsor at this conference. Yeah. What if the Navy put out a requisition, whatever, and they took this contract and they said, "Okay, we're going to pay $99 for hammers, but you could get just as good of a hammer for $29 from another contractor." As citizens, we'd be irked. Yeah. We'd say there has to be control. People like to use the softer word, regulation or accountability. Control. There has to be control. So if you take civil government dollars that the civil government took from your neighbor, you must be controlled in one way or another. You have to be. And I think it's also very, on that issue, it's related. We have many people in general, and we have a lot of homeschoolers in general who say, we do not like that the local public schools are teaching transgenderism and critical race theory and abortion's okay. That's wrong. Mm-hmm. The civil government should not be doing that in the public schools. These are self-professed conservatives and Christians, but now they're saying, "Oh, but you know what? If we take tax dollars from our neighbor, it's okay if private schools or homeschoolers teach their children that critical race theory is good, transgenderism is good, abortion's okay." What happened to us? That's using civil government money, tax dollars, to do the same thing that all these conservatives and homeschoolers have said is bad in the public schools. What happened? We've got to get our brains consistent on this, and it's at the deepest level. It's philosophical/theological.
Mm-hmm. Well, we appreciate, and I say we as in homeschool leaders and NCHE, we appreciate Dr. Brian Ray from the National Home Education Research Institute, as he said, nheri.org. And we have found that research is such an important tool for us as homeschool families and organizations to articulate what we're doing and what we believe in, and the results. The other important thing that Dr. Ray does is help us to think clearly. So please check out that site and consider ways that you can support that. And once again, thanks for hanging out with us, having our annual conversation.
You're welcome, Matt. It's always great to be able to do it with you.
So interesting. I love hearing about, even though I'm pretty certain, I think I'm correct when I say this, that Brian and his wife Betsy don't have any kids at home anymore that they're homeschooling, but he is still right in the thick of things. They know what is going on for sure. So it's always interesting to hear from him.
So let's look at a little bit of homeschool news this week. So the first thing we want to announce is that Capital Fest has been scheduled for this year for April 2nd. And as of the recording right now, we don't have that on the website, but sometime this week it should be going up. So you'll be able to go to our website, and under the events tab at the very bottom, it will say Capital Fest, and you can click there and get all the information that you'll need for that. And we also want to remind you, of course, that you need to be signing up now to attend the Thrive Conference in May. It's very important you go ahead and get signed up and get the best discount that you can.
That's right. There's also a brand new field trip opportunity. We are going back to the Transportation Museum. This is a favorite of families in North Carolina. Every time we have offered this field trip, it definitely sells out. So be sure to go to the activities tab and look for field trips and find the information about the Transportation Museum. That is such a fun opportunity.
So when you go to that field trips page, you're also going to notice right now there's still tickets to go to the Biltmore House for the NCHE Day. And you want to remember, we've told you before, this is not the homeschool day at the Biltmore. This is specific for NCHE. So everything is included. You do get to go to the house and all of the property. So that is on there, and you can get tickets to the Biltmore House through the 21st of March.
Exactly. So good. So many fun things going on. I am super excited. I know a lot of people ask pretty much all year long about Capital Fest. So I am thrilled that we were able to get that finalized and available. So I'm excited about that one for sure. All right. Well, I think that's all we have for you today. So until next time, keep homeschooling with confidence and joy.